Am I audible? Do you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay, very good. Good morning, dear learners. We are now in block 4 of MEG-5, and today we are going to discuss new criticism. Uh, in my last class, I discussed um, some romantic critics, romantic theory of poetry, and today uh, we'll see how this romantic theory of Wordsworth, particularly this romantic theory of Wordsworth, how it was rejected by T.S. Eliot and how some new critics they reacted against it. As I have been mentioning one important thing that every age, maybe in criticism, maybe in art, maybe in literature, every age is a reaction of the previous age. So in the same way, we find how literary critics, particularly the new critics of the early part of the 20th century, how they reacted and how, uh, as a result of this reaction, how a number of critical essays were written by different new critics. We'll discuss it. First, let me tell you the term new criticism came from John Crow Ransom's book. He wrote a book in 1941, and the book is The New Criticism. So please, dear learners, try to have a copy with you so that you can note some of the important points which I'm going to discuss. So this term first came um, by um, John Crow, John Crow, John Crow Ransom's Ransom, John Crow Ransom's book, The New Criticism, which was published in 1941. Uh, this new criticism, also there are a number of critics which I will be mentioning, and also along with their critical essays. For example, I. Richards, F. R. Levis, R. P. Blackmore, Clint Brooks, William K. Wimsatt, and a bunch of other critics. So they were most of them they were American critics, and this new criticism was an American movement. Of course, um, uh, Russian formalism is just in the same way it is parallel with this new criticism. Um, so this is also the other name of new criticism is also formalistic criticism. Um, so here actually this criticism was pioneered by three names as we see in the history of literary criticism. Three names they are T.S. Eliot, I.A. Richards, and F. R. Levis. These three critics they actually pioneered this movement. Uh, the other famous critics, including Russian formalists who supported this movement, are R.P. Blackmore, Alan Tate, Clint Brooks, Robert Penn Warren, and William K. Wimsatt. It was a revolutionary movement in the history of criticism, which gives emphasis on, it's very important, which gives emphasis on close reading of the text. So this is a key phrase as far as the new criticism is concerned. Close reading of the text. What Eliot says, he also, in his tradition and individual talent, I will be also discussing his theory of poetry and how he is reacting against the romantic critics. Actually, close reading of the text was given emphasis. But Eliot says in one of his essays, the poem's existence is somewhere between the writer and the reader, not in his biography nor in his philosophy of life. Then Eliot, this echo of new criticism in some critical essays of Eliot, for example, Tradition and Individual Talent, which was published in 1919. Eliot also in some of his essays like Hamlet and his problems, function of criticism, actually he also devised some other terms like objective correlative. These are very important terms. Objective correlative, association of sensibility, and dissociation of sensibility. Uh, so this is again an important um, phrase as far as literary criticism is concerned. Dissociation of sensibility, while he was referring to the romantic poets, he termed the romantic poets as they had dissociation of sensibility, and while appreciating the metaphysical poets of the 17th century, he considered them that they had association of sensibility. That means sensibility, um, there is a fusion of sensibility, knowledge, experience, and sensibility in metaphysical poets, whereas this was not there in romantic poets, because most of the romantic poets, they were actually they were propagative in nature, and they were agenda based. Their poetry was agenda based, as we also discussed in my last class. So we'll discuss it in details. And while discussing tradition and individual talent, in this essay, he gave importance to tradition, and he rejected the uh, the theory of poetry given by William Wordsworth in his preface to Lyrical Ballads. Uh, as Wordsworth said, it is the overflow of powerful emotions recollected in tranquility. So he said this is not about expression of personality or overflow of emotion. Rather, it is an escape. These are the lines. Please, if you can, if you may note down. It is not an expression of personality. No, but rather it is an escape from personality. Poet is an escape from personality, not expression of personality. Again, Wordsworth said it is an expression of emotion, overflow of emotion. Eliot said it is an escape from emotion. That means the poet who suffers and the poet who writes, uh, and the and here Eliot, Wordsworth says the poet who suffers, he expresses his personality, he expresses his emotion, he expresses his pain and suffering in his poetry. But here actually, Eliot says that the poet who is suffering and the poet who is writing, he doesn't express his emotion nor his personality. Rather, he tries to escape from it, and thereby he gets the maturity of as an artist. So here actually Eliot is giving emphasis on a theory which is known as uh, objective theory or impersonal theory of poetry. Please note down, this is very important as far as your new criticism is concerned. Eliot's objective theory of poetry or impersonal theory of poetry means where uh, poetry is not a personal matter. It is not an expression of one's personality. It is an objective matter. It is an impersonal matter. It is a universal matter. So, uh, poet actually, while writing poetry in its poetic process, he tries to escape from it. He tries to hide his personal tears, personal suffering, personal ego, personal agenda, whatever he has, maybe socio-political or cultural, whatever agenda or whatever feelings he has, um, he tries to avoid it, tries to suppress it so that one can get maturity. At the same time, while discussing so many poets, Eliot actually says that tradition has a greater role to play. That means it is not an individual's personality, nor it is an individual's talent. Poetry is not an individual talent. Rather, every poet borrows some ideas from the past, and thereby he tries to get maturity. The more he borrows ideas, the more he follows his previous poets, the more he gets maturity. That is why he says in this essay that immature poets steal, whereas matured poets borrow. Matured poets borrow the ideas, and accordingly they become great poets. And immature poets only steal some of the lines, and they cannot grow. their poetry cannot become great. While comparing the poet's mind, he gives an analogy. You may again please note down this. He gives an analogy in tradition and individual talents. What is the analogy? He compares the mind of the poets, the feelings of the poets, the emotion of the poets to a platinum filament. As actually he gives an analogy of science from chemistry, where uh, uh, where actually where catalysts have been used, or the scientists they use catalysts. Catalysts means a kind of substance, maybe a filament, maybe a metal, maybe anything else. So in presence of a catalyst, a chemical reaction takes place. He gives an example that when sulfuric acid is formed, sulfurous sulfur dioxide and water. These two elements, two compounds, they combine in the presence of platinum filament, and thereby sulfuric acid is created. So in this chemical process, the filament, the platinum filament, which is responsible and which accelerates the reaction, which makes the reaction possible. In the same way, as it happens in science, as it happens in chemistry, in chemical reaction, in the same way, the poet's mind, the poet's personality acts as a filament, acts as a medium, not only it acts as a catalyst, but it doesn't directly take part in the process of writing poetry. As a catalyst doesn't take part in the process of reaction. It only actually it remains present. It remains present uh, to to make possible that reaction is taking place. In the same way, the poet's mind, the poet's personality, the poet's suffering, his emotion, um, his personal sorrows, actually uh, it is there, but a matured poet tries to overcome it, and here actually the poet's mind is acting as a catalyst. That means the more mature is a poet, the more he tries to suppress it, the more actually he tries to get rid of it. That is why, let me tell you, any piece of poem, any piece of art is an objective, um, or it is an organic whole, where the poet only he takes all the elements from his past, from his present, from his philosophy of life, from his personality, but when he makes it final, when he um, refines it, uh, there actually you cannot find his personal emotion, his personal sorrows and suffering. So the personality of the poet, his personal life, his autobiographical elements uh, are actually it is evolved in a different way, and you cannot find its personality. You cannot find it anywhere in his poem, and thereby the poem becomes a universal um, uh, entity, or it becomes universal. There is a universal message, and when the final poem is written, it becomes a product, or it becomes a gift to society, where everybody, all the readers, they can see their own emotion, their own suffering, and thereby a poem is appreciated by the society, by maximum number of people. So this is something about your T.S. Eliot's impersonal theory of poetry, and he also while um, giving this actually theory, new critical theory, he also devised another uh, critical term, that is objective correlative. Objective correlative is something actually while interpreting Hamlet. In your first year course in drama paper MEG-2, I think all of you have read that Hamlet, uh, Shakespeare's classic Hamlet play, and they are actually, while interpreting Hamlet, Eliot says Hamlet is an artistic failure. I think you know it. Hamlet is an artistic failure, because it doesn't have an objective correlative. Shakespeare has failed in bringing an objective correlative while he wrote that essay while in interpreting referring to Hamlet's mind. He said that his excess emotion, his overconfidence and excess emotion is making the text lacking of lacking of an objective correlative, means a set of incidents, situations, circumstances that is responsible for the creation of a kind of emotion. For a particular emotion, a set of objectives are required, a set of situations are required. So without proper situation, without proper circumstances, if somebody shows excess emotion, it lacks objective correlative. Actually, while interpreting Hamlet's character, he said it. Also, at the same time, he's also saying that Hamlet is the Mona Lisa of literature. I think all of you know it. So the point is, T.S. Eliot, the pioneer of critical this new criticism, he rejected these romantic poets, their poetic agenda, their socio-political agenda, and thereby how they were expressing their personality, how they made romantic criticism as personal criticism or a subjective criticism. So the subjectivity of art, the subjectivity of poetry has been rejected by T.S. Eliot, and T.S. Eliot made poetry or art as an objective platform, made something scientific, again which is also rejected by many post-structuralists and Marxist critics and other feminist and other critics. So we'll discuss, when we'll discuss in other blocks. In my next class, I will discuss other things. But today, now let's go to close reading of the text. And this close reading of the text, actually this phrase close reading of the text is given by in one of the essays of I.A. Richards. I.A. Richards wrote an essay, and this essay is practical criticism. In this practical criticism, he said that the poetry, any piece of poem should be interpreted on the basis of its printed words on the page, on the basis of the printed words on the page, not on the basis of the socio-political angle, not on the basis of poet's personality, not on the basis of history, philosophy, or not any other matter. So close reading of the text means what is there, whatever words are there on the page, whatever lines are there on the page, and whatever metaphor, simile, or whatever other poetic devices are there on the page, it should be um, interpreted as it is, not going beyond the text. Not going beyond the text is known as uh, close reading of the text. That means the text itself is a complete entity. An organic whole, as you cannot separate a man's hands or face from one's body. In the same manner, you cannot you cannot um, you cannot forget the words, and going beyond it, you cannot interpret a poem or the creation of a poet um, on the basis of uh, one's school of thought, one's philosophy, or one's society, one's caste, creed, religion, etc., etc. That means if you forget the poet, then you can interpret the poem in a proper way. So that is how he devised the term practical criticism. He wrote a book on it, and thereby practical criticism also in some of the universities, colleges, it is practiced. That means students are given an unknown passage or an unknown stanza, right, uh, without the name of the author or writer or poet, and the student is asked to interpret the poem, the lines, the stanza, or the passage by his or her own um, knowledge, and without going to the poet or the writer. So that is practical criticism, and this practical criticism gave rise to close reading of the text, and which is the hallmark of this new criticism. And here, Cleant Brooks and Robert Penn, Warren's famous anthology, Understanding Poetry, 1938, actually they published this book. And there also they gave importance to this close reading of the text. If poetry is worth teaching at all, it is worth teaching as poetry. Actually, this is a statement given by, while condemning, they condemned in its preface the use of poetry for any purpose beyond itself, whether historical, whether moralistic, or whether philosophical. That means going beyond it. Actually, this some of the critics like Cleant Brooks, Robert Penn, Warren, and I. Richards, actually they gave importance to this fact that if poetry is worth teaching. Actually, why actually this word teaching is mentioned? This is mentioned because most of the critics were professors. They were professors of literature. They were working in some universities, maybe in America, Russia, or England, and they were, while they were practicing this process of practical criticism, close reading of the text, they said that if poetry is worth teaching at all, it is worth teaching as poetry, not anything else, not as a socio-political product, not as a socio-cultural construct, nor as a socio. Rene Wallach and Austin Warren. There is another book, Theory and Literature, which was published in 1949. Alan Tate, in his book, The Man of Letters in the Modern World, in 1955, and Warren, in his selected essays, 1958, are strictly indifferent to the historical personality and other matters that affect poets and their creation. Actually, in some of the essays, as I have mentioned, they did what? They said that the biographical or the historical perspective of a poet, the philosophical perspective of a poet, his personality, his subjective matters, his personal life, his own his personal sorrows and suffering, these are immaterial as far as their creation is concerned. A poet's creation is concerned. That is why all these elements should be avoided while teaching or while interpreting poetry. So these are some of the important critics and their essays, critical essays, which they wrote to give emphasis on the interpretation of text, and thereby actually they are bringing this new criticism or critical theory. It's not exactly a theory, but of course a kind of theory, a kind of principles that they said this is the function of criticism, and thereby only the text should be given importance, not anything else. Let us discuss some of the principles that this new criticism stresses upon. The new criticism stresses upon the poem as a work of art. So we have been regarding any piece of poem or any creation of a writer as a piece of work of art. A poem as a work of art should be treated as an object in itself. I have already discussed that it is an object. Any piece of work or work of art by any poet should be treated as an object in itself. Means it is an object as somebody as somebody comes across an object, and accordingly one derives one's impression on it, and accordingly one tries to interpret it in his or her own ways. In the same way, poetry should be considered, any piece of work should be considered as an object itself, and accordingly it should be interpreted. Close reading, devised from I.H. Richards' practical criticism, I have already discussed. his practical criticism was published in the year 1929, and William another essay, seven types of ambiguity. Okay, very important point. Seven types of ambiguity is an essay written by William Emerson in 1930. Actually, while giving importance to this new critical principles, while giving importance to the theory of new criticism, the principles of new criticism, the seven types of ambiguity, an essay, an important essay was written, and here actually two things. Actually, he tries to advise the critics, the readers, to avoid two things, two types of particular, two types of fallacies, which is one is affective fallacy and another one is intentional fallacy. Right, affective fallacy. I think some of you might know if you have read in critical terms in any book that what is affective fallacy and what is intentional fallacy, which has been discussed here by William Emerson. Uh, Intentional fallacy is the poet's intention. Very often the poet, if a reader is reading a poem, trying to interpret a poem on the basis of the intention, tries to find out the intention of the poet in his poem. Actually, he will be suffering from this intentional fallacy. Intentional fallacy means he will fail to interpret the poem. He will fail to understand the exact message or the exact intention what the poet had in his mind while writing a poem. We'll be discussing again this point in deconstruction theory. That is a post-structural criticism. We'll be discussing deconstruction theory um, by Derrida, by Charles Derrida. So here actually what will happen is intentional fallacy will be there in the minds of the reader, and thereby he will fail to appreciate the poem as it is. Whereas affective fallacy is something actually the reader himself or herself, the reader has this type of fallacy. That means by applying his own impression, by applying his own mind, his own knowledge, his own schools of thoughts, he will, if he applies all sorts of experiences that a reader has in his mind, whatever knowledge he has in his mind, whatever educational qualification he has in his mind, or so whatever, from whatever culture, from whatever religion or race, whatever ideas he has in mind, if a reader applies all this knowledge while interpreting a poem, he will be suffering from affective fallacy. That means that means the poetry will be affected. The beauty of poetry will be affected by this, and as a result, what will happen? The poetry or the piece of work or a work of art cannot be interpreted in a true way, because all these two types of fallacy will come on the way of interpretation. So this is something as far as new criticism is concerned. This essay plays a vital role, uh, uh, warning the readers to get rid of it while interpreting a poem. The new critics primarily concern The new critics' primary concern is to study the words and structure of the poem as an organic being. I have already discussed it. As an organic being means actually there has been organic fusion uh, of structure and texture. There is a structure of the poem. There is also texture. Structure means the way the lines have been organized, the way the poet organizes the poem, the words, the lines, okay, using symbols, using metaphors, similes, personification, and so many other poetic devices. That is the structure of the poem. And there is a texture means actually again the figurative part, the color or the um, whatever emotion does it create. So accordingly, there is a structure as well as the texture of the poem, and it makes the poem entity as an organic whole, and you cannot separate one part from the other, and you cannot interpret uh, uh, taking it taking one side means taking it or applying your philosophical knowledge, your particular concept of any idea. So if you apply any socio-political or socio-cultural idea, you cannot interpret it in any way. That means if you are giving emphasis on feministic point of view, let us say feministic point of view, you are losing other side of the poem. So thereby you are failing in many ways in interpreting a poem if you are not considering it as an organic whole. That day also I gave another example. Uh, uh, Chemical compounds, you cannot separate the individual elements. For example, you cannot separate hydrogen and oxygen from water. You cannot separate sodium and chloride, chlorine from NaCl, your common salt. So they are chemical compounds, and there has been a fusion, a chemical fusion, a chemical bonding. So in the same way, any poem has it has a chemical bonding. It has a kind of organic bonding. It has a literary bonding. You cannot separate one point from the other. So you have to look it as a whole. As a result, you can interpret it uh, in a proper way. Poem as a medium of expression through language should be studied in terms of uh, poetic language or poetic diction. As I have already discussed the same thing, and accordingly, we get here that there are signs as well as icons, right? That is in terms of icons, not in terms of signs. Linguistics, they consider language in terms of science, which we are going to discuss in my next class. I will be discussing structuralism. There actually I will be discussing science. But as far as poetry is concerned, new critics consider that poetry as a medium of expression through language, it consists of only icons, not signs. Icons means um, that is a connotative language or emotative language, not denotative language. Again, Ransom, um, he has written an essay on it, that textures and structures of a poetry. While discussing it, he said that poetry consists of only icons, not signs, not hard linguistic signs, but icons which are very often connotative and emotative. They are not denotative. Denotative means only one meaning. As far as social science is concerned, as far as your proper science is concerned, material science is concerned, words in the science book, they are denotative. Denotative means if you look at the dictionary, you will find only one meaning. So one meaning will be sufficient. For table, it is table. For trees, it is only trees. But in poetry, trees have different connotations. A table can have different connotations. So man as a human being, its physical aspect is seen in science, but man in literature, in philosophy, actually man is seen in a different way. So the point is, words in a poetry or in a piece of literature, it is only connotative meaning or emotative meaning, because it creates emotion. That is why there are emotative meanings associated with it. Connotative meanings means in different connotations. Actually, you can use uh, the words. You can interpret the words in different connotations. So that is why the language poetry is something. It is filled with icons, not signs. Okay. So thereby, if the new critics actually they gave importance to it, and they warned the readers that if you are taking the help of dictionary, you probably, that means if you are applying it in terms of language only science, uh, you cannot get, the readers cannot get the whole meaning of the text. While doing so, I have already discussed this point. The intentional fallacy and affective fallacy one can avoid this intentional fallacy and affective fallacy, which Wimset and MC badly. Actually, both of them they are actually they're writing uh, some essays on it, and accordingly they say that can be avoided. Intentional fallacy and affective fallacy can be avoided if uh, this connotative meanings and emotive meanings will be taken into account. That is another point. Um, uh, let us discuss this point. Client Brooks is an important new critic. He wrote an essay, "The Heresy of Paraphrase." The heresy of paraphrase. Actually, here um, he warned the readers, and he considered that trying to paraphrase. I think I hope all of you understand. Paraphrasing means you try to make a summary of a poem. That is known as paraphrasing. In plays, in poetry, actually, line by line, stanza by stanza, you have paraphrase. Means in prose form, you write the meaning. Okay, you write the meaning. In one side, there are the text itself, the original text itself, and in the other side, you try to write the meaning in your own words. Right? This is known as paraphrasing. So, heresy of paraphrasing means it is a kind of sin. It is a kind of immoral act to paraphrase a poem. Why actually? Why Clint Brooks actually he warned it? Why he said so? While critically actually giving a remarks um, on the so-called socio-political or socio-cultural aspect of a work of art. So, if you are giving importance to the socio-cultural, socio-political, or the autobiographical, the historical, all these aspects, and try to interpret a poem, actually you are losing or you are avoiding. You are trying to what avoid some the beautiful aspect, some of the beautiful aspects of the poetry. Which are the beautiful aspects of the poetry? Particularly, as I was saying, the texture, the luster, the symbols, the myth, the similes, or whatever the way actually the way in a figurative language, idiomatic language, a poem is written. Actually, you are trying to what go beyond it, and thereby you are losing the real charm, that the real delight, the real beautiful aspect that a poem has. A reader is trying to going out from it. That is why he warned that this is a heresy of paraphrase while paraphrasing poetry. So poetry cannot be. That is why one of the American poets, Robert Frost, Robert Frost. That is why he said it. He once said that what is lost in poetry is translation. You cannot translate poetry, though nowadays actually translation is going on. But he said what is lost in translation is poetry. That means all aspects of a poem cannot be I think whatever I discuss, if you are not a poet, if you are not a creative artist, I think everything you cannot catch. That is why good critics, they are both poets as well as critics. Only criticism cannot help. Only criticism actually will lead literature to social science. So the real charm of literature cannot be found out. The real delight that a literature can give, the enlightenment that a piece of literature can provide, it cannot be obtained if somebody is applying his rational mind and trying to interpret in terms of language, only looking at the dictionary and trying to know the meanings of the word, and accordingly, no poetry can be read properly, cannot be interpreted properly. So he says here is a paraphrase means actually while paraphrasing, it is they are doing some kind of immoral act. Anyway, the next point, which actually Wimsatt and Wimsatt is saying. Wimsatt is a modern critic, a new critic. He says the poem should not mean but be. So in the context of referring to Cleant Brooks' Hira's paraphrase, he says a poem should not mean but be. Actually, here a be means you interpret a poem as it is, which we have already discussed as an organic unit, as an end to itself, an object in itself. Okay, so the poem is a being, and it should be um, interpreted as an organic whole, and that is why if you try to find meanings in terms of socio-political, socio-cultural, and other aspects, philosophical aspects, actually it is not good, and thereby you are going away from poetry, not you are approaching poetry. Okay. For example, let me give you an example. If you don't mind, see somebody, beauty is something actually. If somebody is suppose there is a beautiful lady or a beautiful girl dancing or singing or whatever, in whatever way you find a beautiful girl, as Wordsworth found Solitary Reaper and wrote that poem. So you you cannot you cannot appreciate the beauty of the girl in terms of her caste, creed, religion, her society, whether she is a poor girl or a rich girl, whether she is a from this society or that society, somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, somebody's wife or beloved, whatever. That means if you apply all this knowledge, if you refer it if, from different ways, from different approaches, you will be losing the very sense of beauty that somebody carries it, that somebody has. So in that way, poetry, a piece of poem as a piece of work of art is like that. It cannot be interpreted. It cannot be. Its beauty cannot be tested. Beauty cannot be um, imagined in one's mind if somebody is going beyond the poem itself. That is why the words of the poem, the lines of the poem printed on the page is everything, not socio-political or socio-religious or socio-philosophical context. Paradox, another important point as far as new criticism is concerned, is that paradox is appropriate and inevitable to poetry, which Cleant Brooks says. Uh, Cleant Brooks says uh, that paradox is appropriate and inevitable in poetry, means the language of poetry is paradoxical. That is why Cleant Brooks he wrote this essay, Language of Paradox. Actually, this is a beautiful essay written by Cleant Brooks, and there he says paradox is appropriate and it is inevitable, means the language of poetry is paradoxical. Paradoxical means the very sense of paradox is that means there are opposites. The poet very often actually does what? He says something and again he changes his idea. He, uh, he puts it in other context. He tries to capture something and at the same time also he loses something. That means he plays a kind of hide and seek game while choosing the appropriate words, while choosing appropriate images, while writing a poetry. Only a creative artist can understand actually what happens in the process of writing poetry. So here actually in this effort, artistic effort, what happens? He passes nights after nights, days after days, months after months in finding or trying to uh, trying to run after the appropriate words, the appropriate images, the appropriate phrases, or whatever the 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 right kind of poetic diction that he can use while composing a poem. So a lot of labor is also he does, or he takes a lot of pain and suffering for that. So it is not. See, if you are not a poet, you cannot imagine how much pain is involved while composing a poem. Not that you can find instantly a poem. It's not possible. So it takes a long effort, a sustained effort, a constant effort. So that is why language of poetry it becomes paradox. Paradox actually to some kind, it's some kind of metaphysical. Metaphysical means it is a kind of transformation that is taking place. That is why, since language of poetry is paradoxical, only the printed words can help. If you involve your mind on the printed words, phrases, idioms, or lines, you can understand. Otherwise, it cannot be understood. Going beyond the page of poetry and turning one's mind on or dwelling um, on the philosophy of the poet or personality of the poet, character of the poet, his biography, etc., etc. It is not easier to find the meaning. Another important point is vulgarization of meaning through rhetoric, mass communication. Actually, vulgarization of meaning means here actually uh, uh, we get three phrases. Vulgarization means not not giving due emphasis on poets' works or on a particular work of art. That means again shifting the meaning from the text to something else. So that is known as vulgarization of meaning, means not giving due emphasis on the words of poetry. So that is here actually we get on this basis as people comment a poem from different perspective, from different angles. They interpret and they discuss it. Uh, they spread the poet's philosophy of life and all that. This is known as vulgarization of meaning, which is criticized by the new critics. And while referring to this, we can have three important phrases as far as this vulgarization of meaning is concerned. Uh, One is idealize the world, and accordingly, idealize the world means the romantic poets. The romantic poets very often they idealize the world. They always expected that there will be a beautiful world. All people will actually they will be idealistic. They will be refined. They will help each other. They will be elevated to a different level, and thereby, as Gandhi idealized the world, saying that there will be Rama Rajya, as Plato said. So this kind of Platonic philosophy is involved in it, and accordingly, romantic we find romantic poetry, and this is only giving one aspect to poetry, one aspect to life as well as poetry. What life should be, not what life exactly what life is. Okay, that means removing from going beyond the reality. Romantic poets they idealize the world, and accordingly we find stress idealize the world. That means this is a kind of poetry, and people uh, who appreciate such kind of poetry, they cannot appreciate other kind of. That means they become selective. They become selective in their approach, and they lose something as far as other kinds of poetry is written by other poets. So again, that is another phrase: improve the world. People very often actually they would like to see that okay, the poets should try to write some kind of poetry which will improve the world, which will make the world a beautiful place to live in, a better place to live in. And accordingly, we find classical poetry, and all the classical poets they gave importance to it. That means how man man can be saintly beings, and man should not commit any mistake. Man should not suffer from any disease or anything. There should not be tragedy. No, no. This is not. This is not possible. That in a world, everybody will be happy. Everybody will be prospering, or everybody will have a beautiful life. This is not possible. So, classical poetry, and those people those readers who want to read only classical poetry, they have this sort of mind. So my point is, when people's mind become readers' mind become selective, they only read that kind of poetry. Thereby, they carry a kind of what bias. They carry a kind of what prejudice, and thereby they do not appreciate other poets. That is why poetry as an organic whole, actually it is not attracting the minds of the reader. During actually this early part of the 20th century, new critics actually why they gave emphasis on it, because of this evolution of so many knowledges, branches of knowledges. Actually, many people try to interpret poetry or interpret art in their own way. As a result, printed words on poetry actually it did not attract the minds of the people. So whoever is writing, giving importance to the artistic process, giving importance to the work of art as it is, actually they fail to find readers, because people, the readers, they become selective. I think some of you might be, if you are a romantic in your nature, that means you would be like to see that in any work of art, if that is, if something is idealized, you would like it. If you are a, if you have a classical mind, and if you see that okay, the author is or the poet is trying to improve the world, you will like it. Otherwise, you will not like it. There is another phrase that come to that, realize the world. That's another phrase. Actually, accordingly, we find modern poetry or metaphysical poetry. Eliot praised, admired metaphysical poetry a lot. He has an essay on metaphysical poets, and there actually he wrote two essays. First, actually, he wrote an essay where he denounced that metaphysical poets. After some years, he wrote another essay where he appreciated metaphysical poetry, saying, "Okay, I was mistaken. I failed to appreciate metaphysical poets because, accordingly, he gives this actually this beautiful phrase: dissociation of sensibility and association of sensibility." Okay, see, while interpreting metaphysical poets, okay, he says metaphysical poets are actually modern because they have a fusion of emotion and experience. You understand, I think, what I say? Emotion and experience. Emotion means if only poetry would be emotive, if it creates emotion, or it is a product of emotion, actually, it will be agenda based. If emotion and reason both will be fused in an organic way, actually, you can find modern poetry, and that is why modern poetry and metaphysical, they were very obscure. It's not easy to understand them. In the same way, modern poetry is also obscure. To some extent, modern poetry is metaphysical poetry. That means metaphysical aspect of poetry is revived in modern poetry. Of course, there are other things in modern poetry which I am not going to discuss. So, accordingly, uh, we find these three terms as far as this new criticism is concerned. New criticism, to some extent, actually, they appreciated metaphysical poetry and modern poetry, and accordingly, these new critics actually they tried to give emphasis on, this modern poetry or modern art. That is why in modern art you see practical life when you are coming across any modern art. Modern art means actually you do not understand. While not becoming able to understand, there gives delight. When you fail to understand, you find more pleasure when you understand something. That means you uh, you you discover the mystery of a piece of art when you fail to understand. So there lies the real pleasure. If you do not understand, it is more meaningful. Of course, it appears very antithetical. It appears uh, very actually unreasonable. That when you fail, you can have more meaning. That is why modern poetry is understood in that way. Modern art is also appreciated in that way. Even some of the modern plays or films, do not understand. You do not understand many things, still you enjoy it. So that is something as far as the new criticism is concerned. Uh, they have some limitations. For example, they were too much preoccupied with textual analysis, which is again criticized by the post-structuralists, by the feminists, by the Marxists, which in the postmodern, by in terms of postmodern theory, in terms of post-colonial theory, in terms of cultural theory, actually, this new criticism has also been criticized, has also been challenged. And actually, another point, another flaw, another limitation as far as the new criticism is concerned, they reduced poetry to a formula, which is absolutely not right. They reduced poetry to a formula means they again, while criticizing the romantic poets, because romantic poets they were giving rules, and while actually criticizing the rules, they also gave a set of rules that this is good, that is not good. In this way, they were also actually this is their limitation, and thereby they were also criticized. Again, they were wrong uh, uh, in rejecting the historical, sociological, and cultural aspect of a poem or any piece of art. You cannot altogether reject everything. You cannot, that means poetry is not produced in air. It doesn't come from air, or it doesn't come from the space. It is created on a land. It is created by a creator. It is created at a particular time, and that time, as Matthew Arnold says, that the three M's: man, moment, and milieu. I think in my first class I told you, man, moment, and milieu, they are responsible for the production of a piece of literature, maybe poetry, drama, novel, or whatever it may be. So all these aspects cannot be overlooked, and thereby actually these new critics were suffering from a set of limitations, so which again is addressed by post-structuralists and other theories, which we are going to discuss in my next class. I think already it is 10 o'clock. Before I conclude, any question if anybody can ask, please ask. Otherwise, I will conclude. Any question to me, dear learners? Any question? Hello? Do you hear me or not? Hello? Any question to me? Otherwise, we will conclude. And again, let me again say something. Please read your material. You have got beautiful materials as far as IGNO material is concerned. MEG-5 materials, I think it has 7-8 books. You try to collect these books. If you have not collected printed form or books, please get it downloaded and try to save it on the screen of your computer or your smartphone, and try to read something. So when you discuss a theory or any critical aspect of literature, please read it so that it is helping you for the sake of your examination. With this request, again I thank you for your patience, for your in spite of the fact that you have some problems.
Sir, which books we follow?
I told you that book is Peter Berry's book. If you can buy a Peter Berry book, it's a better book. It's a handy book. It's a very good book. Peter Berry book. Here I have this Peter Berry book. See, is it visible? Peter Berry
Sir,
book.
important questions.
Questions. I told you, direct questions are always coming. Direct questions because the IGNO academicians, the professors who are there to frame your material, to frame the questions, they accept direct approach. Means directly question would come like this: discuss um, the neocritics um, and their theory. So discuss, describe,
Sir,
like
may
this.
I see that book?
This is the book. I have got 4 5 books. This is the ideal book. I think you can buy. I have already got big volumes of books. Actually, these are not necessary for you. It will put in trouble. Big volumes of books are there also, containing 500 pages, 600 pages. These books will not help you. Okay, your IGNO material is sufficient. That is an ideal material, a good material, uh, in a very brief manner, in a very logical manner. The material has been prepared so that it is helping you, giving a little time. You can prepare from that material only. If you have a career approach. In future, if you want to make it a career, literature as career, okay, you may read other books. Otherwise, your IGNO book is IGNO material is sufficient uh, for your examination. I think if you read that book sincerely, you will be benefited and you will get good marks. As far as
Sir,
your
what
assignment,
about the assignments?
assignments, okay, assignments, you should always be hopeful that we are there to help you in every center. The counselors are there and they are ready to help you. Better you would try to make your assignment artistic. Try to make uh, color pens. Use color pens. Try to highlight the points. Try to write the questions. First write questions, then you try to answer. So question and answer, it will help you because the counselors, they do not have questions. Um, Very often they are busy and they, while evaluating your assignments, they would like to see the questions and how much you are writing. Also, the length of the answer will be seen. Uh, if you are writing a good answer, balanced answer, uh, so if you are presenting in a better way, if your handwriting is good, if you have made your assignment neat and clean, so if you have tried to make it, if you try to make it artistic, so definitely you are attracting the minds of the evaluator and thereby you are getting. So minimum 70-80% marks are given very often. If you make it very rough, uh, illegible, very in a very careless manner, if you submit, I think even fail mark is possible. You have to again submit, okay, and you will get fail mark for that. Please don't try to be careless while submitting your assignment. You must mention your uh, roll number, your email, your phone number, everything. You should mention so that um, some evaluators, they also try to contact you in case you have made your assignment rough and you are going to get fail mark. They will contact you so that you can submit again to that teacher, to that evaluator, so that you are not going to put in trouble. So wishing all the best. I think these are some of the um, important suggestions I would like to give. Examination is not in our hands. We have in our hand there is assignments and 30% marks are there, and most of the counselors, they are going to award you maximum marks because nowadays no examiner wants that you should get a fail mark, may it be theory or practical. Okay, the teachers, the examiners, the counselors, they are not in favor of awarding any fail mark to anybody. Now the examination has been learner centric and maximum emphasis is given so that justice is given to a hardworking, a sincere student or a learner. So wishing all the best. Thank you for joining. And next class we will be discussing structural engineering. Right. Thank you.